Daniel Andrews. I'm not sure it can get any worse, but I suppose it can. Remember last night I talked about the red shirts. Daniel Andrews used taxpayers' money to pay campaign staff during the 2014 election. The Victorian police decided not to lay charges. Let's go back a bit. The same Daniel Andrews was Health Minister in 2009. An Auditor General's report found hospital waiting lists were falsified throughout Labor's last period in office. Then as now, Andrews refused to admit any wrongdoing. But even the former Labor Premier, John Cain, lamented the loss of the principle of ministerial responsibility, given Andrews' failure to resign or be sacked. As one of my very perceptive viewers wrote last night of Andrews' performance and his failure to take responsibility, and he wrote, "It once again underscores the gross Soviet and Chernobyl-style bureaucratic, ham-fisted, blundering incompetence embedded in the DNA of authoritarian left-wing governments when confronted with and dealing with a real crisis," unquote. So what on earth did the Prime Minister mean on Wednesday when he said, "We are all Melburnians now"? PM, you're no JFK. We are not part of, nor should we be identified with, the incompetence of the Victorian government. What must employers and workers be thinking? And the 2.2 million school children who thought they were returning to school on Monday. Yet Andrews has now got his hand out to Canberra for more of your money to fund this incompetence. Treasurer Frydenberg said on Tuesday night, the lockdown will cost the economy $6 billion in the coming weeks. Then we've got the spectacle of police and healthcare workers in protective gear entering locked-down towers in a North Melbourne public housing estate. More than 3,000 residents treated like battery hens. The latest excuse? A shortage of health professionals in the Victorian bureaucracy. So the Victorian Police and the Australian Defence Force had to close Melbourne at midnight last night. This is not believable, all because Daniel Andrews hired amateurs to supervise the quarantine of travellers returning from overseas, and they were not trained for it. Why private security guards? Well, Andrews put the Jobs Minister, Martin Pakula, in charge of hotel quarantine. Why? Well, the Victorian Liberal member for Kew, Tim Smith, belled the cat, and I quote, "The untrained and ill-equipped private security guards are members of Pakula's union, the NUW United Voice." Can you believe this? It gets worse. There was no planning to ensure that if the same security guards became infected, they didn't head home or head out to the town. So the New South Wales-Victorian border is now closed, and all this a consequence of the complete mismanagement in handling a simple issue of quarantine. As a result, Victoria is sending a quarter of the national economy back into recession. Is Andrews accountable? No. Why? What Andrews said on Wednesday when asked about the quarantine farce, those matters, they're the subject of a judicial inquiry. So he doesn't have to comment. He hides behind an inquiry. He doesn't make public the report that he relied on to call the inquiry, and he won't say whether the report will be made public. In spite of all this, let me make 3 points. The virus has killed since March, that's March, April, May, June, what are we, July 9, 22 Victorians, most very old. As my colleague Andrew Bolter said, 10 times more people have died each flu season without calling for bans. I note that amidst all the hysteria over 44,000 people dying in Britain of COVID-19, we're told most were aged above 80 and had existing health conditions. I think the real virus affecting all of us may well be the draconian response to all of this. I mentioned on Tuesday that in 2009 we had a swine flu pandemic. The word pandemic was used then, as it is now. There were not 9,000 cases, as we have with coronavirus. There were 38,000 infections. There were not 106 deaths, as there are now, but 191. There was no lockdown. There were no border closures. There were no calls for tighter government controls. In fact, the then Health Minister, the Victorian Nicola Roxon, called the epidemiological models that predicted 20,000 deaths as ludicrous. But at one stage, the Australian Deputy Chief Medical Officer was talking about 150,000 coronavirus deaths. Alarmism and hysteria have taken over. We now have to seriously ask whether the response by all governments is correct. If Andrews could be so hopelessly wrong on the quarantine issue, what else has he been wrong on? I certainly wouldn't trust his judgment. Would you?